According to the CDC, clean, healthy water may soon be limited by the presence of pollutants, drought, and aquifer depletion that will limit water availability to our rural residents. There are about 13.1 million households in the United States that obtain their drinking water from private wells. So this makes it an important issue to make sure this water is safe for their consumption. Nearly all rural families rely on groundwater from a well for their drinking water. This groundwater comes from the aquifers under the state of Nebraska. There's the High Plains Aquifer, also known as the Ogallala Aquifer, which is the biggest and most well known, but there are also 7 secondary aquifers in Nebraska.
I'm Megan Sittler, and I'm the domestic water and wastewater management educator. And my role is, I'm based in Lancaster County, but I serve in a statewide capacity for extension. Within that expertise is water quantity, water quality in general, and then working with individual well owners as well as community systems, and then the professional organizations and agencies that regulate or work with the industries that service those folks.
Groundwater provides nearly all the drinking water in rural Nebraska. In the database, there's more than 28,000 records of wells in Nebraska. It is essential that the quality of groundwater, along with that of surface water resources, be protected.
So about a quarter of the state's population has their own individual well. The majority of those folks are either out on an acreage or a farmstead. There are a number of smaller communities. South Bend is probably one of them that comes to mind, that all the homes in that community actually still have their own well.
Because so many people rely on this groundwater for their drinking water in rural Nebraska, it's essential that this water resource be protected.
We know from monitoring wells that are done within like NRD systems that are more agricultural based and that sort of thing, but a lot of when people test their private water supply, a lot of that isn't made public. You could make a safe argument that there is a significant percentage of those folks that have their individual well that may have either current water quality issues or may be at risk of having them in the future depending on the land use around them.
According to the Nebraska Extension Office, more than 20% of private wells sampled contained at least one contaminant at levels that were a potential health concern. Understanding your drinking water and taking steps to protect your family are of utmost importance.
There are EPA guidelines that apply to any drinking water system. Communities, municipalities have to adhere to those. As a private well owner, you have to make the decision. So like nitrates are one of the most common things that are regulated, and they're a primary health hazard, so they're a primary maximum contaminant level is what the EPA regulates, and that's at 10 parts per million. If you get that reading and you own your own well, there is no one that will tell you you have to fix it. Those people that are managing 25 to 35% of the water supply across the state need to understand those risks and those concerns and how they can impact their health.
The safety and quality of private drinking water in Nebraska is not subject to any federal or state regulations. It is the responsibility of the well owner to make sure their water is safe.
The two that we see most common in Nebraska that have direct potential negative health impacts are nitrates or bacteria, so total coliform, E. coli, that sort of thing. Bacteria are very immediate impact, but a lot of people end up confusing that with, oh, I've got the stomach flu, or I can't get myself feeling right, and they don't even think about they may be doing it to themselves through their water supply. So those are the two most common current primary hazards of concern. And then we have a whole slew of kind of secondary contaminants. Those range from anything from sulfur and hydrogen sulfide gas that can have some minor health impacts like dehydration, diarrhea. You can actually get lightheaded if you're showering in too much of hydrogen sulfide gas or too high of a concentration within your water. But those are fairly lower incidence.
When planning for a private drinking water supply, wells must be located and constructed to minimize risk of contamination. Potential sources of contamination, such as septic systems and chemical storage, should be located downgrade from the well. And all work must be done in accordance with the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Service regulations.
Nitrogen occurs naturally within the soil. When the nitrites are largely nitrogen that switches, or different types of nitrogen molecules that are tied back to fertilizers, more than likely both agricultural and then just your normal lawn fertilizer. Nitrates are a real challenge because there isn't an effective way to remove them from the groundwater, so they can actually continue to build up over a long period of time. And then as groundwater moves, nitrate can move with them. Bacteria is primarily within a just total coliform bacteria. It's primarily land use. Most of the contaminants kind of naturally occur in the soil, and it's just through different chemistry process, groundwater chemistry, water chemistry, that different groundwater resources that interact and may change those more readily. There are options for individual homeowners. Reverse osmosis is the most common that will handle nitrates. Most commonly, you just put a reverse osmosis system underneath your kitchen sink. With bacteria, really about the only effective way to handle that is like through shock chlorination. And then a lot of that just becomes also the preventative, think about where your stormwater is going, thinking about how you're treating land around your well, and that sort of thing.
It is especially important to protect your drinking water on your acreage, farm, or ranch. The layers of soil, sand, and gravel above the aquifer provide some, but not complete protection from contamination. Your groundwater can be contaminated when pollution sources are not managed carefully. Some sources of this contamination can be animal waste, salt, pesticides, fertilizers, oil, grease, litter, and many other pollutants. There is no single test to determine the safety of drinking water. Generally, private well supplies should be tested annually for nitrate and bacterial contamination.
And then a lot of it just becomes kind of the continued maintenance on both the drinking water system and the wastewater system. We generally recommend try to get people on kind of an annual testing level, at least for kind of the primary health hazard. With nitrates in particular, if a woman becomes pregnant or you have a small child, it's very essential that you get the water tested. That's the primary population that is affected by higher levels of nitrates. So if that's your reality or becomes your reality, have your water tested prior to using that water for the woman to ingest, or as the small child comes into your life also. So the other thing that we encourage people, as you've moved into an area, or even if you've lived there for a while, like primarily acreage developments, or to ask your neighbors, just talk to them. Did you have your water tested? What did you test for? What are your concerns? Do you have elevated levels? Are you noticing things like feel good, or your water's developed an odor and that sort of thing? It's a good baseline and a good conversation to have to kind of help direct what you should test for, potential emerging concerns in your area, and what you may need to do within your home.
Testing for nitrate and bacteria annually do not guarantee that the water is safe. There could be other contaminants present. Tests should be done for other substances only when specific contamination is suspected. Public water supplies have regulations on the amount of nitrogen and bacteria allowed in the water supply. While not required, users of private water supplies can use these regulations as standards when they test their own wells?
Well, first and foremost is the Nebraska Extension Water website. That ranges from everything from stormwater and how you're operating your landscape for horticulture to agriculture and manure management. And so you get kind of a comprehensive look depending on where you fall. Within that section, there is a residential drinking water or residential water section. Then that covers drinking water, wellhead protection, wastewater. It has all those resources that I spoke to. You can also, on that website, sign up to have an e-newsletter delivered to you. So any new content that's added in any of those areas that you would choose is delivered to you, so you don't even have to make the effort to go to the water.unl.edu website. There is a national website, the Private Well Owner, and it's an organization through Nebraska, or the National Groundwater Foundation and several other well driller organizations across the state. They have really good 101 fact sheets, even some of those certain video tutorials that I mentioned. If you want to get a little bit more in depth in understanding the groundwater resources around you, then there's the National Groundwater Association. So they have a number of kind of online tutorials also that you can walk through that are collected from universities and extension, whether it's here or other states in the region, or I guess nationally I should say, that they pull from also.